Hi everyone, this is Dikshit. Welcome to my channel. In this particular video, we will going to discuss about one of the best method to connect to EC2 instance, which is Session Manager. And prerequisite to watch this particular video, you need to know the basics of AWS services like EC2, IAM, and if you know few basic Linux commands, then you can understand this particular video a little better. Now, without wasting any time, let's get started. I'm logged into my AWS account, and within that also I'm there in EC2 dashboard. First, let's understand what is Session Manager and why do we require a Session Manager. I've created a mission to understand that. So let me select that EC2 instance and let's click on connect. This shows up different ways to connect to EC2 instance. One of the most widely used option to connect to EC2 instance is SSH client method. In this particular method, we will gonna copy this SSH command. In any one of the SSH client tools, we're gonna execute this SSH command through which we will be able to connect to EC2 instance. But for that, we need to do two things, or we need to make sure two things. While creating a EC2 instance, we need to associate a key pair. And whatever the PEM key, which is related to the key pair, so that has to be present in the machine from which you want to connect to the EC2 instance. So that is one thing. The other thing is whatever the security group which is associated with the EC2 instance, in that inbound rules, 22 port should be enabled. So if we have these two things, then only we will be able to connect via SSH command. So now when we have this most widely used SSH client, why do we require another method to connect to EC2 instance? In real-time projects and production grade projects, so whenever you create a EC2 instance, so whatever the security groups that you will gonna associate with these particular instances, they'll have one restriction that 22 port will be accessed within only VPC. That means whatever the instances that you create within VPC, they only will be able to connect each other via 22. And if you want to connect from any machine outside VPC, that won't be allowed. So this is what we will have it in real time or production grade projects. We won't be able to connect to this particular EC2 instances, which is outside VPC. So in most of the projects, this is what they will gonna follow. This is due to some security concerns. And in this particular situations, what they do is, so in most of the projects, they're gonna create a public subnet, and this is where they're gonna host a EC2 machine. So this they're gonna call it as bastion host. First, users will log into this particular bastion host from outside VPC, and then from this bastion host, they're gonna connect to the EC2 instances. But I've seen in some projects, 22 port is completely blocked. In those particular projects, then this SSH client method, they won't be able to use it at all. This is where we can make use of session manager. By using this particular session manager without any SSH keys, without any bastion host, without opening any inbound ports, we will be able to connect to EC2 instance. So now let's see what are all the settings or configuration that we need to make to connect to EC2 instance via session manager. Let me go to instances page. Let me launch a new instance. So we will gonna connect to the new instance via session manager. So the name of the machine, I'll give it as demo session manager. And then I'll gonna choose Amazon Linux as my EMI. I'll be choosing instance type as T2 micro. Key pair, I don't require any key pair because I won't be using SSH method. And even in the network settings, I'll gonna uncheck this SSH traffic because I don't require 22 port to be enabled. And the next thing is in the advanced section, so the IAM instance profile. To enable session manager, we need to do two things. One is in the AMI, whatever we are using, in that AWS session manager agent should be installed. So when I select Amazon Linux, by default in this particular AMI, session manager agent will be installed. Upon mission creation, the session manager agent will be automatically started. That is first thing. The other thing is, this particular EC2 instance should have access to session manager endpoint. So that's the reason we need to create one IAM role. So let's create that particular one. Let me click on create new IAM profile. And I'm there in IAM page. So first let's click on create role, and this is where we need to choose the use case. I'm going to choose it as EC2 and then click on next. Here we need to select a policy, AWS managed policy that I've documented in this particular GitHub repository. The policy that we need to select Amazon SSM managed instance core. So let me copy this, search here, and let me select this and click on next. Provide a meaningful name. I'm going to provide it as session manager EC2, and then let me click on create role. And now this particular role has been created. Let me copy the name of the role and let's choose in EC2 creation page. Let's refresh this and then let me select this particular role here and then let me click on launch. So these are the two things that we need to make sure. As I'm selecting already Amazon Linux, SSM agent will be installed already. Upon machine creation, the session manager agent will be up and running. The other thing is for the machine, we need to provide a permission to access session manager endpoints. So that's the reason I've created a role where I've provided a policy. In that particular policy, all the permissions which are required to access session manager will be there. So now let's go back to the EC2 instances page. And the new machine that I created is demo session manager. Let me select this and click on connect. And still I can see that instance is not connected to session manager. It will gonna take a little time. And you can see that now instance state is in running. So now let's again click on connect. And now you can see that session manager is enabled. So to connect via session manager, you don't require any SSH keys. Let's see that. So is EC2 instance connected with any security group? You can see that there is a launch wizard. Let me open this particular security group. In this inbound rules shouldn't be there. None of the inbound rules should be there because I have not enabled anything. Only outbound rules will be there. Inbound rules 22 port or any other port which is not there. The other thing is I have not associated any key pair with this particular EC2 instance. Still, I'll be able to connect to this EC2 instance via session manager. Now you need to choose session manager tab and click on connect. It will open a new tab in the browser and then I'll be able to connect to the EC2 instance. And via AWS CLI also, I'll be able to connect to the EC2 instance using this session manager. To do that, first, we need to make sure that we have AWS CLI installed in our machine and as well as session manager plugin, which is installed in our machine. So to install this AWS CLI and session manager, we can use Chocolatey, which is a package manager for Windows. In Ubuntu system, if you want to install anything, so then you're going to use apt, which is a package manager. Through few commands, you'll be able to install most of the tools. Likewise, if you want to install the tools in Windows machine, then you can use this particular Chocolatey. So let's go to community first. And then first we need to install Chocolatey. If it is not there, click on install Chocolatey. It will redirect to this particular page. So this is where you can choose this particular command. And now open a PowerShell. PowerShell, we need to open it with administrator, run as administrator. And then it will gonna prompt you to enter yes or no. And this is where you can execute the command to install the Chocolatey. In my case, it is already installed. So that's the reason it shows up already the Choco found and Chocolatey is installed. Post installation, you can execute Choco to verify Chocolatey is really installed or not. And once the Chocolatey is installed, let me go back to the Chocolatey website. And this is where you can search for a click on find packages. First thing is AWS CLI. So search for AWS CLI. And then copy this particular command and execute it in your command prompt. So if you use Chocolatey, this is kind of very easy to install any tool, because if you don't go with this particular method, then you need to download exe files and run that particular exe files, post executing that exe files, you need to set some path variable, so many things that we need to do it. So instead of doing all those kind of things, you can just copy this particular chocolatey command, and then through which we will be able to install any given tool in Windows. Well, now AWS CLI is done. So once that is done, so then we need to search for AWS Session Manager plugin. Let me copy. This is the formula, chocolatey formula. So again, let me install it. So now this is also installed. In my case, both were installed. So that's the reason it says that it is already installed. And if you want to know more information about Chocolatey, so then I've made a small video on this Chocolatey as a package manager. So I'm gonna link that particular video in video's description. You can go and you can refer that particular video. So now both AWS CLI and Session Manager has been installed in my machine. So now to connect to that particular EC2 instance via Session Manager is easy. First is we need to go to the account security credentials. Let me create a secret key and access key because that is required for our AWS CLI to authenticate or connect with this AWS account. Let me scroll it down, and I have already two access keys which are created. So let me delete or deactivate one so that I can create a new one. As I'm using the free account, so I'll have a restriction on access key, only two access keys that I can create on a root account. So let me create a new access key. And this is my access key and secret key. So now what I will do is I'll go to Visual Studio Code. I'll gonna open a terminal. First, I'll gonna authenticate AWS CLI with this access key and secret key. Then we will gonna connect via Session Manager. So to authenticate with AWS account, AWS configure, and then it will gonna ask to enter access key. Let me provide access key and then the secret key. So let me copy the secret key and then let me provide that as well. US East 1 is the region that I want to work with. Yes, I've created EC2 instance in US East 1 itself. So that's where I'm gonna leave as is and then default format none. So let it be as is. Now once AWS account is authenticated, the command that we need to execute to connect to EC2 instance via session manager is AWS SSM start session and the instance ID. So let me copy this command and then let's give the EC2 instance ID. Now let's go back to EC2 dashboard, instances, and let me choose the demo session. This is the instance which is newly created. Let's choose instance ID and let me provide it here. Now within few seconds, you can see that with a session manager, I'm able to connect to EC2 instance. And here 22 port is not enabled and none of the key pair is associated with this particular EC2 instance. And with this session manager, we will also get other advantages. So whatever the commands, let's assume now I'm going to execute these sudo su commands and many other commands. I want to capture these commands, whatever user executes, these commands, I want to capture it in CloudWatch logs or in S3. So by using session manager, this is possible. That is one more advantage of this particular session manager. Let's see how do we do that particular one. First, let me go to session manager settings. So in the session manager preferences, we need to enable CloudWatch log. Preferences, and this is where it shows up all the general preferences, CloudWatch logging preferences, S3 logging, and let me click on edit. And now let's enable CloudWatch logging. First, we need to create a CloudWatch log group. So here I see that I don't have any CloudWatch log group in my account. So that's the reason. Let me go to CloudWatch page now. This is a CloudWatch page. Let me click on log groups. Let's create a log group and I'm going to name this particular log group as AWS SSM session-logs. Any meaningful name. I'm giving this AWS SSM because in an account we can have n number of log groups to completely differentiate session manager log group. I'm naming it in this particular way. And other options are there, retention settings, how many days you want to create these particular logs. So 5 days are never expire. I'm going to leave it what is the default. And we can also encrypt these particular logs by using KMS key. So as it is optional, I'm leaving it as is and clicking on create. Once this particular log group is created, let's go back to session manager. And here, let me click on this enter log group name and again choose this particular log group name from the list so that the newly created log group is listed here. Let me choose this and I'll also uncheck this particular box because we have not enabled encryption on the log. So that's the reason I'm gonna uncheck this particular box and let me click on save. And now the preferences have been saved. You can see that CloudWatch logging is enabled. And this is a log group where I'm going to store all my session manager logs. So this is first setting. The other setting is now we need to give a EC2 a permission to put its logs into CloudWatch. To do that, so whatever the role that we have used, which is session manager EC2, for this we need to add a permissions to push the logs into CloudWatch. That particular policy also I've listed here in this particular readme.md, which is there in my GitHub account. So this is the policy that we need to provide it. So let me copy this, go to IAM page and add inline policy. Select JSON here and then provide my policy and then click on next. We can give a meaningful name. I will give it as CloudWatch SSM EC2 and then let me click on create. So once I do add this particular permissions and as well as in the preferences when I select that particular CloudWatch log group, now when I connect to our EC2 instance via session manager and whatever the commands that I am going to execute, all those commands will be logged in CloudWatch log group. So let's see that. So I've connected via session manager. Let me do sudo su. Let me execute ls. Let me create a directory mkdir test hyphen test and then let me remove this particular file as well. And all these commands that I've executed should be logged in my log groups. Let me go to log group. Let me click on session logs. And this is where you can see that my commands have been logged here. So all the commands I've executed rm-rf. So I can see that particular command here. And the first command that I executed was sudo su. Then ls is a command. All the things with the command, even the output will be captured in this CloudWatch log group. And additional to this particular one, in the session manager, we can encrypt our session as well. So let me go to session manager preferences and we can see here, we can enable the session also with a KMS key encryption. So this is also possible. And you can see a lot of advantages. One is without any SSH keys, ports, you are able to connect to EC2 instance and you don't require bastion host as well. The other thing is whatever the commands which are executed within EC2, we can log them in CloudWatch log groups. And if any dangerous commands has been executed, for example, reboot or rm-rf, all these are dangerous commands. Whenever these commands are executed, if you want to get an alert, that also we can configure it in my CloudWatch log group. So I can create a metric filter and whenever these commands are executed, we can get the alert for that particular command execution as well. So now let's see, let's create a Ubuntu image and how do we enable session manager in that particular Ubuntu machine also. Let's see that. So this is a machine which is created based out of Amazon Linux image. So now let's create quickly Ubuntu machine and how do we enable it in Ubuntu machine? Let's see. So I'm gonna call this particular machine as Ubuntu SSM demo and here I'm gonna choose Ubuntu as a AMI. And in Ubuntu AMI, by default, a session manager agent won't be installed. So we need to install it. So I've chosen 22.04 as my AMI. And then T2 micro, the instance type is fine. So I'm going to choose proceed without any key pair. Here, I won't allow any SSH traffic. And very important thing here, we need to choose IAM instance profile, which I'm going to choose as session manager EC2. This is the role that we need to choose, which has a permission for CloudWatch logs as well as session manager endpoint. And as I mentioned, SSM agent won't be installed. We need to install it, right? So I'm going to use user data section to install and configure session manager agent. So this is also, these commands also have documented as part of this readme.md. So let me copy and put it here. And once these things are done, let me click on launch instance. So it will going to take few seconds to create instance and to install SSM agent in my EC2 instance. So the commands I have provided as part of user data. So let's go to instances page. And whatever the new EC2 instance that I've created, which is there in pending state. Let's wait for this particular instance to be in running state. Now I see the instances in running state. So let's choose this particular new machine that we have created, Ubuntu SSM demo, and let's click on connect. And now you can see that session manager is enabled. We can click on this connect so that it will gonna open a new window in the browser and we will be able to connect to the EC2 instance, which is of Ubuntu as AMI. And not only through browser, we will be able to connect via AWS CLI as well. So let me go to my VS Code terminal and let me create a new window. And in this, what I will do is I'll gonna copy again session manager command and I'll gonna provide the target, which is my instance ID. When I do that and provide the instance ID, so within few seconds, I'll be able to connect to my Ubuntu machine as well. So let me do sudo su ls pwd, all the commands. So even these logs or these commands will be captured as part of our CloudWatch log groups. So let me go back to this particular session manager log group again. And you can see that this is a new session that I add with machine, new machine. So when I go to this particular log group, and you can see that the commands that I've executed, which is sudo su, and post which I've executed ls instruction. And once ls is executed, I've executed pwd. Even the command and both the output will be captured. So this is what I wanted to discuss in this particular video. You can see that session manager is one of the good method to connect to EC2 instance when 22 port is not enabled. And also, even if 22 port is enabled, you can still go with this particular session manager because it has advantages. We can log the commands executed on an EC2 instance. The other one is we can secure the session via AWS KMS keys as well. So that's it. Thank you. Have a great day. If you've liked the video, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.